Well, thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, each of you, for having me here. Good afternoon on this cold, wintry day in Washington. These are extraordinary times. These are remarkable times. You know, just last week, walking down the hallway in the Capitol, I ran into a janitor carrying a screwdriver, coming to change the sign on Harry Reid's door. And I'll tell you, with all great change, there's usually foreshadowing. You know, you could get the foreshadowing of the November election come August, September, October. You know, one of the first signs, Jim, is suddenly the Democratic senators were nice to us. They were looking ahead to Election Day, and you'd be on the elevator, they'd say, hey, what a great tie that is. Have you lost weight? You're looking sharp. It's like, okay, so contemplating losing that chairman's gavel, are you? It was an astonishing election in November. But it's important to understand what the election signified. The election was not an embrace of Republicans. The election was not an embrace of one party. Instead, the election, in my view, was the voters roundly repudiating the path we're on. This was an election in which the voters said, listen, the Obama economy, it ain't working. We want something different. We want real leadership. Now, I got to say, Republicans have an opportunity, an incredible opportunity right now. We have been once again entrusted with leadership in Congress. And I want to say thank you to Heritage Action for hosting this event. Because as I understand this event, the core focus is you got a majority, what are you going to do with it? Amen. And you know, there's a division of thought in this town. There are some people in this town who will intone in gravelly voices, we need to get things done. Oddly enough, the people saying that, it doesn't really matter what those things are. There are voices who will say, if you stand for anything significant, that has electoral risk. I remember in the last 2 years, people said, no, Republicans, you shouldn't stand and fight on anything because you don't have a majority. Okay, we have a majority. Now, mark my words, suddenly there are voices that are saying, well, you still shouldn't stand and fight because you don't have 60. You know what? If we had won 60 seats in the Senate, you'd hear the voices saying, what? No, not yet. You don't have 67 votes. I'll tell you this. If you get elected promising to do nothing, when you're in office, you will do nothing. I'm going to suggest a different way to get things done, a different way to govern, and a different way to win elections. Listen, I very much agree with President Ronald Reagan, who said the Republican Party is not a fraternal order. It's not simply about palling around with guys in red sweaters instead of blue sweaters. It is a movement unified around a shared set of ideals. Liberty, the Constitution. And it matters only insofar as we are standing up and defending those constitutional values. And so what I would encourage my friends, my colleagues in the Republican Party, in the Senate and the House, is something very, very simple. Let's stand up and lead. Let's lead with a big, bold, positive agenda that says to the American people, you had a referendum and you rejected the Obama agenda. There is a better way. That's our opportunity. I'll tell you, for all the Republicans intoning, we must get things done. If we simply settle into business as usual in this town and keep growing and growing and growing the Leviathan and keep shrinking and shrinking and shrinking that sphere of individual liberty, we will demoralize the millions of men and women who came out in November and gave Republicans the biggest majority in the House since the 1920s. Not only will we not win elections, we'll get walloped, and we'll deserve to get walloped. What I would urge my colleagues to do is very, very simple. You know, it's the advice. A lot of us here have kids. Every one of us has told our kids, tell the truth and do what you said you would do. That is the advice I would give every one of our colleagues. You know, it's striking in the Senate. 2 years ago, I remember joining the other Republican freshmen in Mitch McConnell's office. There were 3 of us. It was lonely. It was really lonely. We had enough for a game of spades. This year, there are 12 Republican freshmen. A dozen. Nearly a quarter of the Republican conference are freshmen. And I'll tell you what I've encouraged every freshman is that if each of you that just fought and clawed to win an election, if each of you in the conference simply stands up every day and says, hey, let's do what we said we would do, that will have a transformational effect on the United States Senate. If each and every senator in January answers questions the exact same way we would have answered those questions in October before the election, that'll have a transformative effect. In my view, Republicans should take this opportunity to lead with a big, bold agenda that focuses on jobs, on liberty, and on security. And let me talk about 10 specific agenda items that we should take up and pass, and these are agenda items that I laid out before the election. If we want a majority, this is what we should do, and after the election, my view, shock of all shocks, is we should do exactly what we said before the election. Step number 1, embrace a big, positive jobs, growth, and opportunity agenda. Now that means a host of things. It means, for example, as we will do this week, finally passing the Keystone Pipeline. But listen, jobs are a lot more than Keystone. Keystone matters. It is an example of partisan politics trumping common sense in this town. But we need a jobs agenda, an energy agenda, far broader than that. We've seen incredible growth in the energy sector in the last several years. Last year, I introduced the American Energy Renaissance Act, a comprehensive piece of legislation to remove the federal barriers to creating millions of high-paying jobs in the private sector, in the energy sector. And not just in energy. Low-cost energy is also bringing manufacturing jobs back, bringing steel jobs back, bringing the kind of jobs that built the dignity of the middle class in America. We need to pass legislation making clear that the federal government has no authority to regulate or prohibit fracking, that the states are perfectly poised to make determinations in their own states, and there's no need for the feds to stick their nose in the middle of it. We need to remove the arbitrary export bans on liquid natural gas, on crude oil. We need to open up federal lands to exploration, to development. President Obama loves to brag about the energy exploration during his tenure without noting that virtually all of it has happened on private land and federal land. The federal government has been standing as an impediment, as a barrier to developing those resources. Number two, we need to do everything humanly possible to repeal Obamacare. You know, 5 years ago, when Obamacare was being debated, reasonable minds perhaps could have differed over whether this thing might work. Today, seeing the devastation, seeing the train wreck, seeing the millions of Americans who've lost their jobs, who've been forced into part-time work, who've lost their health care, who've lost their doctors, today, the only reasonable, prudent outcome is to acknowledge this thing isn't working. And we need to repeal it and start over. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean with President Obama still in the White House? Well, first of all, in my view, Congress should take up and using every procedural tool available, including reconciliation, repeal Obamacare with 51 votes in the Senate. Now, the president is very, very likely to veto that. For the next 2 years, we're not going to have the votes to override that veto. What we then need to do is systematically begin teeing up legislation after legislation addressing the most harmful consequences of Obamacare, providing real relief to the millions of people who are hurting. For example, we need to introduce legislation, take it up and vote on it, saying, if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep your health insurance plan. The president repeatedly looked in the TV cameras and made that promise over and over and over again. We need to codify it for the 6 million people who've had their health insurance plans canceled because of Obamacare. We need to address the pain the federal government has caused to them. And I would note that also puts Democrats in an interesting position. There are lots of Senate Democrats who say, well, gosh, I like Obamacare in the abstract, but there are individual problems with it. Okay, let's start talking about those individual problems. One after the other, you decide, as a Senate Democrat, if you're in favor of the federal government causing people to lose their health insurance plans or not. You decide if you're a Senate Democrat. If you're in favor of the federal government bailing out giant insurance companies or not. We need to pass straightforward legislation that prohibits federal government bailouts of the insurance companies. One after the other, we need to pass these. Now, one of two things is going to happen. One, the Democrats block it either through filibuster in the Senate or through the president vetoing it. Or two, they pass into law. If the latter, we begin to provide meaningful relief to the people who are really hurting. And if the former, there is absolute clarity as to where the parties stand and what we stand for. But we need to honor those commitments. Number three, we need to finally secure the border and stop the president's unconstitutional amnesty. You know, it's amazing. Right now, the White House is castigating Republicans. How dare you focus on securing the border? Literally at the very same time, we are seeing terrorists trying to murder free people across the globe. The very same day CENTCOM has been hacked by ISIS. The White House press secretary is too busy saying, no, 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 don't do anything to secure the border and protect Americans. This is a matter of basic common sense. And I got to tell you, one of the fun things about Washington is listening to Senate Democrats who live in states far, far away from the border explain to those of us who live in states on the border how wonderfully secure the border really is. I have a modest suggestion. Perhaps we should move the White House down to the Rio Grande Valley. After all, there can't be more people climbing the White House fence than there are now. You know, when you go down to the valley, and in Texas we have a nearly 2,000-mile border on the southern border, what you hear from people who live there, what you hear from law enforcement, from local elected officials, and by the way, from Republicans and Democrats, is secure the borders and protect our security. It's a basic common sense issue, and when it comes to amnesty, anyone who's concerned about rule of law, anyone who is concerned about separation of powers, anyone who believes in the Constitution should be deeply, deeply dismayed by the President's decree that he will simply ignore federal law. When he unilaterally tried to grant amnesty to millions of voters, I said voters. What's interesting about the President's approach on this is it seems like it is always, always, always political. Before the election, President Obama said, "This election will be a referendum on my policies. Every one of my policies will be on the ballot." President Obama was right. Words that have not been said often at the Heritage Foundation. But you better believe, if the Senate Democrats had been reelected, if Harry Reid had grown his majority, the president would have gotten up and opined, "The people have spoken, and they have embraced my agenda." Instead, the president got up and said, "The people who didn't vote have spoken." Never mind those pesky people that actually showed up and expressed their views. Let me say something about both Obamacare and amnesty. We brought Michael J. Fox up here in a DeLorean, and we went back in time to October of 2014, not too long ago. You would see Republican candidates all over the country in October of 2014 saying, "If you elect us, if you give us a Republican majority, what will we do? Number one, we're going to fight tooth and nail to repeal Obamacare." The number one topic Republican candidates raised on the campaign trail. And number two, if you elect us, if you give us a Republican majority, we're going to stop President Obama's illegal and unconstitutional amnesty. That was just over 2 months ago. And yet now, when the topics come up, at times you hear crickets chirping. It ain't complicated. We need to do what we said we would do. Number four, we need to hold government accountable and rein in judicial activism. You know, one of the most important things this new Senate is going to provide, I hope and believe, is real, meaningful oversight of the Obama administration, of the abuse of power, of the lawlessness, of the regulatory abuse. I am looking forward to what I hope will be Republican chairmen conducting careful, sober, serious inquiries into the abuse of power and the millions of people who are hurting because of it. I'm looking forward to seeing the United States Senate finally begin doing its job. For 6 years, Harry Reid has been Barack Obama's most important protector. I'm looking forward to seeing serious inquiries into the trampling of religious liberties that have occurred over the last 6 months. I'm looking forward to seeing finally some real scrutiny to prevent judicial activists from being put on the bench who will impose their own radical agenda, including, sadly, the judicial activism we have seen in recent months, with the courts effectively striking down the marriage laws in 33 states. The Constitution makes clear marriage is a question for the states. It's not a question for a bunch of unelected federal judges who may disagree with the democratic views of the people who live in the United States of America. Number 5, it's time to stop the culture of corruption. I've said a lot of times that the biggest divide we have in this country politically, it's not between Republicans and Democrats. It's not between the establishment and the Tea Party, as our friends in the media like to write about. It is instead between career politicians in Washington in both parties and the American people. Now, I am hopeful we will see real bold leadership from Republicans this year and next. But I got to say, the lame duck was aptly named. It was not encouraging to see the Cromnibus, a giant pile of corporate welfare, being the first things Republicans rushed to pass through. Wouldn't it be nice to see our elected officials respond with the same diligence to the taxpayers that they respond to the promises made to lobbyists on K Street? This town is fundamentally corrupt. Both parties come together and they say, let's reauthorize the XM Bank. Why? Helps a whole bunch of giant corporations, just hurts the little guys. The big guys give us checks, the little guys don't. One of the many, many reasons we need to finally pass a term limits amendment to the United States Constitution. Serving in Congress should not be a lifetime job. But what should be lifetime is a ban on members of Congress becoming lobbyists and coming back after serving in this job. We need to pass fundamental tax reform, making our tax code simpler, flatter, fairer. And I'll tell you the single most important tax reform. We should abolish the IRS. Now, the voices of Washington will say, tisk, tisk. That is inconsistent with getting things done. You know, I will note, some years ago, Steve Forbes did a remarkable job starting to build the foundation for a flat tax. A simple flat tax that is fair, that every American could fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. The last 2 years, I believe, have fundamentally changed the dynamics of this debate. As we have seen the weaponization of the IRS, as we have seen the Obama administration using the IRS in a partisan manner to punish its political enemies, in my view, there is a powerful populist instinct to take the 110,000 employees at the IRS, to padlock the building, and to put all 110,000 of them down on our southern border. Now, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But you got to think, look, if you were coming illegally into this country, if you had traveled hundreds or thousands of miles in the grinding heat, if you swam across the Rio Grande and the first thing you saw was 110,000 IRS agents, you turn around and go home too. It may well be the case that we won't succeed in abolishing the IRS and adopting a flat tax with Barack Obama in the White House. We may have to wait 2 years for a Republican president to lead that fight. But what we can do in the interim is we can, one after the other, tee up simplification of the tax code, make the burden easier, reduce the burdens, reduce the power of Washington, which produces growth, which unchains the citizenry and weakens the coercive power of Washington. Number 7, we need to audit the Federal Reserve. You know, one of the most corrosive things we have seen over the last 6 years has been an easy money policy. QE1, QE2, QE infinity. And I'm reminded of John Edwards' speech, Two Americas. John Edwards, in this respect, was right. Another sentence rarely said in Heritage. If you go to Wall Street, if you go to those with wealth and power who walk the corridors of power in the Obama administration, the conventional view is easy money is great. The conventional view is we're not seeing significant inflation. But I'll tell you, if you go talk to working men and women, if you go talk to an Hispanic laborer, like my father was when he came to this country, if you go talk to a single mom who's waiting tables at a diner, they've seen the price of milk go up, price of chicken go up, price of ground beef go up. They had seen until recently the price of gasoline go up. They've seen the price of electricity go up. They've seen their health insurance. They were promised a $2,500 cut. Instead, they've seen it rise over $3,000 a family. And they've also seen median wages stagnate for some 2 decades now. If you're a single mom trying to pay the bills and the cost of everything you're spending keeps going up and up and up and up, and the one thing that doesn't move is your paycheck every 2 weeks, you're feeling the consequence of Washington's easy money policies. We need stable, consistent, strong monetary policies. Number 8, it is long past time for us to pass a strong, balanced budget amendment. Take it up, vote on it, and pass it. What we're doing to our kids and grandkids right now, in my view, is fundamentally irresponsible. And by the way, this is not a particularly conservative view. This is basic common sense. Get out of this godforsaken town and go to anywhere in America and talk to real live people. Doesn't matter what party, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, and lay out some basic principles. Live within your means. Don't bankrupt our kids and grandkids. Follow the Constitution. There's nary a room in this country outside of Washington, D.C., where the entire room wouldn't agree with those. It's only in Washington that when you say we should stop piling debt higher and higher and higher and higher on our kids, that statement is viewed as radical, extreme. It's only the views of the vast majority of Americans. It's only basic common sense. When Barack Obama became president 6 years ago, our national debt was just over $10 trillion. Today it's $18 trillion. It's larger than the size of our entire economy. Once and for all of the Republicans who campaigned saying, we're going to stop bankrupting our kids and grandkids, let's stand up and follow through and actually do that. And the best way to do that is to put in the Constitution strong protections to prevent Congress from continuing to dig this hole deeper and deeper and deeper. Number 9, we need to repeal Common Core. We need to get the federal government out of the business of dictating educational standards. That would be the NSA interested in what we're saying. You know, education is far too important for it to be governed by unelected bureaucrats in Washington. It should be at the state level or even better at the local level. And we need to, at the same time, embrace and champion school choice for every child in America. Every child has a right to access a quality education regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of religion, regardless of socioeconomic status. In my view, school choice is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And I got to say the differences on this issue are stark. New York Mayor's Bill de Blasio, one of the first things he did was go up and try to throw young African American kids out of the schools that were performing for them in Harlem. It's a sad thing to see politicians more interested in pleasing the union bosses who are writing checks to him than in taking care of the kids who desperately want hope and a ray of opportunity for the future. It's a sad thing to see the U.S. Department of Justice coming against young African American and Hispanic kids in Louisiana saying, we're going to try to shut down your opportunity to get access to a better education. We're coming up on Martin Luther King Day. I can think of nothing that would be a greater legacy for Dr. King than for us to embrace across parties, across race, across lines, that we are united in saying every kid has a right to a quality education regardless of who they are. And finally, we've got to deal seriously with the twin threats of ISIS and a nuclear Iran. Listen, these are dangerous times. This past week, we've been stunned to see radical Islamic terrorists murdering innocents in Paris. Our hearts weep for the journalists wrongfully murdered, for the police officers targeted and murdered, for the Jewish customers at a grocery store murdered because of who they are. And this is part and parcel of a longer pattern across the globe. In recent months, we have seen radical Islamic terrorists attacking in Sydney, in Canada. In Israel, Hamas terrorists coming in with butcher knives and murdering Israeli-American rabbis in synagogue as they prayed. We've seen ISIS beheading journalists. We've seen the Taliban murdering school children in Pakistan. We've seen Boko Haram kidnapping little girls and murdering thousands. These are not isolated incidents. These are not challenges for law enforcement. This is a concerted, radical, dangerous attack that seeks to undermine the very basis of free civilization. Look at who they're targeting: journalists, children, police officers. And they don't discriminate between Americans, Israelis, Parisians. They target the West. And yet you cannot win a war against radical Islamic terrorism with an administration that is unwilling to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. These were not a bunch of ticked-off Presbyterians. And we will not effectively combat what we're facing until we acknowledge what we are facing. Now, I will note just recently, President al-Sisi in Egypt gave a courageous and an important speech. For a Muslim leader, he stood up and he urged peaceful Muslims to stand up against this corruption of their faith that is urging people to murder in the name of faith. And that starts to lay out. We need allies who will take this on. But I got to say, it is hard to enlist the support of allies when America ceases being a good ally. How sad was it in the streets of Paris as 40 world leaders walked down the street? Absent was the United States of America. Where was the president? Where was the vice president? Where was the Secretary of State? Where was the Attorney General who had been there moments before but chose to get on a plane and fly back home? You know, all of us remember September 11th, 2001. I was living here in Washington, D.C., just south of the Pentagon. My wife was working in the White House. I remember her having to pull off her shoes and walk barefoot across Memorial Bridge because she couldn't get to her car. I remember the putrid stink in the air of the smoldering Pentagon. I will say, in the immediate aftermath of September 11th, nations across the world came and stood with America. The nation of France stood with America. It was sad and unfortunate that we have not seen that same leadership from this administration now. And I would note that that lack of seriousness of purpose, that lack of resolve is profoundly dangerous. It's dangerous because it encourages radical Islamic terrorists to redouble their efforts, and it's dangerous because nations like Iran see that weakness. The single gravest threat to our national security is the threat of Iran acquiring nuclear weapon capability. And this administration seems bound and determined to go down the road of a foolhardy deal. Indeed, the Deputy National Security Advisor of this administration described that an Iran nuclear deal would be the Obamacare of the second term. Those are his words. So that's a comforting commitment. One of the things I hope we see from this new majority in Congress is meaningful oversight and leadership to restore America's leadership in the world. I hope we see Congress hold this administration accountable and do everything we can so that we stand with our friends and allies and we demonstrate the resolve that is necessary to stand up to those who pose serious threats to the national security of this country, to those who would seek to murder innocent Americans. That's what we need from a Republican majority, is bold, positive leadership on jobs, on liberty, on security. We need to demonstrate that we believe the words we said on the campaign trail. We need to demonstrate that we will actually fight for the men and women of America and not simply for the growing power of Washington, D.C. That's what this conference is about. So I want to close the way I started by simply saying to each of you, thank you. Thank you for urging this majority to earn the mandate we've been given. God bless you.
I'll moderate.